Okay, everybody, good afternoon again. Welcome back to the last session of the Hope Beyond Hurt conference. This is a conversation between myself and Giles here, Giles Duley. You'll be all very familiar with him, and over the course of the next hour or so, you hopefully become very familiar with some of his incredibly powerful and evocative work as a photojournalist as well.
Layla?
Yes, Layla.
There's always one.
I'm going to share with you a story, if you don't mind, just before we start, which is kind of relevant as well. When we were out having our lunch there, Emer and I were sitting with Layla, talking, and we were chatting to her about Edson, who accompanies Giles everywhere. We were with...
Not everywhere.
Well, almost everywhere. Dirty Minds. It's like a carry-on. It's like a carry-on movie, the old comedy tradition from England here, you know. But he works as PA and so on to Giles, and is that okay? Yeah. All of that. But we were with Edson the other night and talking to him about you know, the Derry idiom and the kind of language you use here and the words and phrases and all of that. And I assumed that he was this very polished Londoner. So Leila had said this, that she would love to meet him because we were speaking very highly of him and so on. So we brought Edson over to meet Leila. Sits down, Leila introduces herself, Edson introduces himself to Leila, talks about how much he enjoyed her contribution to the conference, and Leila immediately says to him, "Are you from Holland?" And I looked at Emer, Emer looked at me. We were quite astonished because we've been with Edson, talking to him over a period of a couple of days, and I had no idea. I thought you're a Londoner, you know. So I can now speak very frankly to you about London in a way that I couldn't before, maybe, you know.
English people now.
But
I also said he can have 100 wives in an hour.
Giles, there's this.
No camel.
Was it Casablanca? This could be the beginning of a beautiful friendship or something, or something. Could be more than that. You're all very welcome to this. It's billed as an in-conversation event, and it will be. It's not an interview in a sense. It is a conversation, and I will ask questions. If anything occurs to any of you that you want to ask, just by all means put your hand up, and it's a great opportunity to hear from someone like Giles, who has been at the front line but has been changed by that experience in obvious ways, and maybe not some not so obvious. So we'll try and tease all of that out over the next hour or so. And I've actually been asked to ask a couple of questions of you in the course of it from a couple of people who are in the audience, and I'll do that as we move along.
Okay, and I'm trying to work out who asked the questions.
You can do that. You probably actually guess, you know. But you're saying you want to begin with something very, very topical, hot off the press. Really?
Yeah, I mean, I actually wanted to start with something that's got nothing to do with really what we're discussing today, but kind of seemed very relevant, both where we are here and some of the people that are here today. But as some of you might know, I was in Gaza. I got back sometime Monday. Good to know. So I should have.
Was Susan there as well? Or who's
Yes, 2 p.m.
Edson actually is rather than a PA, he's my photographic agent. And
I
it
beg
drives
your
him crazy that I've never kept a diary in my life. I never write anything down. So actually trying to keep track of where I am is pretty much impossible for anyone, including myself.
Yeah. You strap a sat nav to his head. That's the advice I would give.
Yeah, don't do that when I go into Gaza. But anyway, so I just got back, and I shoot. I'm a bit of a Luddite, so I shoot a lot of stuff on photographic film. And so my lab in London has just been processing some of the film that I did in Gaza, and literally just sent it to me right now. So none of this stuff has actually been printed or processed, and they're very low-res scans. But I know a few people here have asked me what the situation is like in Gaza, and I know that there's a sort of a connection in many ways with some of the situation there with the situation here.
Tremendous affinity, surely, yeah.
I just wanted to share because also I go to a lot of places and I see a lot of injustice, and I try not to judge, and I try just to show things as they are. But I have to say, very few things have made me as angry as this recent trip. So very briefly, I'm just going to literally just flick through. These are just like contact sheets. I've got this big old camera that shoots huge, great negatives, so there's only a few pictures. But for people who don't understand or haven't seen what is going on right now in Gaza, and unfortunately it's hard to get to see it because not many journalists get in. Just here is just a selection of one of the villages.
So you can see them on these screens, either side of the stage.
Just the.
Yeah, if I describe them, or if you want to describe them, Giles, for Leila's benefit here.
I mean, I think all I can say later is just the devastation of
its buildings, huge shell holes, destruction. Yeah, it's a massive tangled wire. Buildings with the walls blown out at the sides.
Actually, it's kind of interesting to hear people say words that come with the.
Yeah.
But this communities. This was a village.
Just utter destruction, sheer destruction. Buildings literally leveled almost to the ground, and they were several stories high.
This was a family of 8 children perished in that building.
Who lived in this one here?
Yeah.
That's a mass, Leila, of sort of concrete and the metal which holds reinforced it and clothes tangled onto it as well. Is that a
Yeah,
tower?
in the right there you can
Yeah.
see the mosque that was blown up because
That's the
mosques were
mosque, yeah.
targeted primarily.
Yeah. And the buildings pockmarked by bullets or shells and things like that. A lot of it.
Yeah, Apache helicopters came in at very low level and just shot away everything.
Yeah.
And not screaming. Or you, or 'cause you can actually.
That's, well, it's probably more important that people here would see it, Susan. I'm okay. I can twist around, it's no problem. But it's
There's
just
a-
sheer devastation. Why did you say that angered you more than all these other places you've been to or these other experiences you've had?
You know, I think it's relative. I mean, a lot of the places I go tend to make me quite angry. But there is something so shocking about the situation in Gaza. I think one of the things that is hardest is the fact that the people who are there can't even escape.
Yeah.
So I've been dealing a lot with refugees from Syria recently, and what's happening in Syria is beyond comprehension. But at least they have one option left, which is to flee, which is a terrible thing to happen.
Yeah, it's an escape route.
But there is
yeah.
there is an option. The people in Gaza literally have no option. So when you talk to families and they say that the kids are terrified, and their kids say, "We want to leave. We're scared. Please, can we go?" Their parents feel completely unempowered because they can't even run. There is no escape. There is a wall around, and this is what is happening to their communities. Anyway, I just wanted
Quite shocking.
to share that.
So yeah, that's fresh. That's those were taken then just
Last week.
last week in
Yeah.
Gaza. And, just the scale of the destruction is breathtaking. It's incredible. And you know what, Giles? I mean, this is a far cry. This kind of work is a far cry from the kind of photographs I would say you expected to be taking when you embarked upon a career of photography, because it wasn't to capture this kind of these kinds of incidents or these kinds of experiences.
No, I mean, for the people that were at my sort of workshop yesterday, I talked briefly about the fact that I was 18 when I had a car accident. Found myself in hospital, had no idea what I was going to do with my life, and I got given a little Olympus OM10 camera and a book by the war photographer Don McCullen. And so my intention after reading Don McCullen's book was to follow in his footsteps and become a conflict photographer. I was really moved by his work. But I had this little camera, and I learnt photography lying in a hospital bed, and then I started photographing some friends that were musicians and in bands, and kind of by mistake I became a music and fashion photographer. Although, as I did explain, as a 19-year-old, that was a kind of
By
a very
mistake?
pleasant mistake. Yeah.
Well, why by mistake? What
Well, I mean,
what
I'd
did-
never really set out to be a music photographer. It's just I was photographing bands, and then
Yeah.
I remember at sort of 19 getting kind of phone calls to fly across to the States to photograph bands that I loved, and remember there was a band called the Black Crows, and I was really into them, and I got this call at 19 to go and photograph them, and I was living in a little village down in Somerset, and suddenly I'm getting flown across. I'm in Detroit with this band, and they just played, and we were backstage, and the bass player was chatting to me, and he's got this bottle of Jack Daniels, and he's sipping from it. And I'm thinking, this is really cool.
rock and roll.
Yeah, and he goes to me, "Charles, do you want a whiskey?" And I went, "Yeah." He just hands a whole new bottle and passes it over to me. And so suddenly all my plans to go off and do conflict photography kind of got sidetracked. Although a good story about being put in your place, and it's the kind of thing I could imagine would happen in Derry, is I got back to Somerset and I went down to my local pub, the Cat's Head. And
Great
one
name.
of the old locals is sat there, and I'm full of myself. You know, I'm thinking I'm just flying to Detroit to hang out with this band, and I say to the guy, you know, "All right?" He goes, "All right, Giles, where you been?" And I said, "Well, I've been to Detroit to photograph this band." You know. And he turns to his mate and he says, "Oh, it's terrible how far folk have got to go for work these days."
I mean, you were obviously sort of star-struck at that initial stage. Would you met other big names in the course of your work?
Yeah, I mean, I work with people like Mariah Carey, Oasis,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
got a fight with Liam Gallagher.
Who hasn't?
Yeah, exactly. On the list. But it was a fun time. It was the 90s in London, and so it was the time of kind of a lot of exciting music happening, and being part of that scene was really interesting. I mean, my love is people, so
Yeah.
people in any sort of work at Worlds, and photography is like a passport because it enables you to kind of get into other people's lives. So in the work I do now, I get to meet people in difficult circumstances, but at that time I got to kind of hang out with bands and be part of that world. So it's great.
How quickly do you go though from being star-struck to being a star, or feeling like a star?
I never felt like I was a star, but I partied like one.
Yeah.
Um,
Aye.
yeah, I mean, it was, I like to embed myself properly in wherever I'm working.
It's called
So-
researching.
It's called
Yeah.
researching, exactly. So, but as I say, I mean, I was in my early 20s, and yeah, I enjoyed
Yeah.
it.
So when did the decision come for you? Why did the decision come to move from that kind of, it has its place, it has its role, it has its function, it has its purpose and all that, but it doesn't strike me as anywhere near as important as the kind of work you do now.
Yeah, I
so
mean-
when and why did you make that change?
I mean, it was a kind of growing cynicism and feeling within myself. As I say, in my early 20s, it was great fun, and I don't regret kind of doing that. But always there's this kind of nagging feeling that I could do something more with both my work and with my life. Increasingly as well, the way a lot of the magazine's work was changing. I didn't like the way that women were often portrayed. I worked for a lot of magazines like Esquire and GQ, and it was increasingly the case that any actress or whatever would have to be kind of half dressed to even be in the magazine. And I'm a kind of portrait photographer. I love people, and I love doing very simple portraits. And suddenly, that wasn't really what people were after. They were after, as I say, if you were photographing an actress, you should be half naked, and so it was actually a combination of all those things. And as I say, it's a sense I wanted to do something more with my life, and just feeling really empty. I was doing what everyone thought was a kind of perfect life. I had a flat in London. I had a model wife. I had all these parties. I was hanging out with all these bands, and to go home every night and just feel completely depressed and empty. You kind of think, what have I got to do to change my life? Because I had what I thought everybody would want. And then it all came to a kind of a head one day when I was doing a shoot in Charlotte Street Hotel in central London, and it was an actress, and she'd turned up, and it was her like on a sofa or something like that. But there was an argument going on between her agent, the editor of the magazine, basically about what state of undress she would be in. And she wasn't quite happy with it, but her agent was saying, "Go on, this will get you lots of publicity." And I remember just sitting there going, "This is not why I love photography." And I'm like, "This is not why I became a photographer." So I had I had my rock and roll moment. And the story is that I took a big Mamiya camera, which is a huge camera, and tripod and everything, and threw it all out the window of the hotel.
Keith Moon would have been proud of you.
Well, yeah, apart from the fact, if you know me, I'm not that rock and roll. And it was more like a little hissy fit. And I just threw it actually on the bed in this hotel room. It just happened to bounce out the window. So everyone else saw it fly out the window. And I'm there going, "Oh, how do you put that on an insurance form?" But it was kind of a symbolic moment. Like literally my cameras were kind of smashed in the street, and I walked out on the job and sort of thought that was the end of photography for me.
Yeah. So you had to then, you decided to embark on a new photographic direction, and you had to get yourself a new camera.
Yeah, well, actually, no. I mean, it was. I completely walked away from photography.
Oh, completely.
Yeah, and I said that's it, and I'll never take another photograph again. And to cut a long story short, and I'm very good at long stories, but I became a care worker through various twists of fate, and I ended up looking after a young boy with autism, and I was his full-time carer eventually. Something completely different from the world I'd been in. The first time I was truly happy in my life because I could see this kind of positive impact I was having on somebody else's life. I could see the relationship I built up with this guy, Nick, and I didn't really think about photography. But a couple of years into looking after Nick, we had a conversation with his family, and we were trying to get his story out and try and get him the care and support that he needed. And they suggested maybe I start taking photographs of his life and documenting. So one of my friends bought me a camera and said, "There you go, do it." And so I just started taking photographs, started to see the impact telling Nick's story had, and then from that, moved into what I do now.
And you purposely then moved in this particular kind of direction.
Yeah.
How easy was it to break into that? Because, I mean, as you say, photography is a passport, but not all photographers get to go to the places you've gone to, or get to photograph the kinds of things you've covered. So
I mean, it's not easy, and transferring from one style of photography to another is not. People think, "Oh, you're a photographer, you can just suddenly become a different photographer." All the contacts I had, all the relationships I had with magazines, none of them were of any use to me. So I really started from scratch. I mean, I was only 29, but at 29 it felt like I was really old and starting a kind of new career. But again, I was quite liberated because as a fashion photographer, music photographer, I was always trying to emulate other people. I was always looking at magazines going, my stuff needs to look like that, my stuff needs to look, and I was copying other people's work. And when I decided to do this, I decided to do what I always wanted to do and shoot the way I wanted to shoot. And and in a sense not care about what people thought of it. And I contacted a lot of charities and NGOs and said, can I come and document your stuff? I went to Angola for a few months. And I used to do another care job. I looked after somebody with MS, multiple sclerosis. He was a very awkward man. I used to call him Mr. Grumpy. And so I looked after Mr. Grumpy, and I'd do 24-hour shifts, 7 days a week. I was doing the two people's jobs. And I would do it for about 6 weeks in a row without a day off, and use the money from that to go and fund a trip. And I actually went, I think it was 18 months without a day off, including Christmas, just in between the two. And when people say to me, oh, how do you get to do this? Some things you have to work for, and I made a choice at that stage that I was going to give up everything. Like all my stuff went into storage. I had no home, and I just worked. But it gave me the opportunity to do the stuff that I wanted to do. So I do believe I've been very lucky in my life, but I also believe that I created those opportunities.
Yeah, we've worked damned hard to achieve it.
Well, yeah, there's a great book by Hemingway, The Old Man and the Sea. And I remember reading it when I was about 18, and I had this car accident and wasn't sure what I was going to do with my life. And there's a bit in there, basically the old fisherman kind of goes out every day and always prepares his lines and is always ready, but he never catches anything. And the young guy that's working with him leaves, and everyone's kind of making fun of him that he spends all his time preparing every day, even though he doesn't catch anything. And they say to him, why do you bother spending so much time preparing all your lines, going out when you don't catch anything? He's like, because when the time comes, I will be ready. Yeah. And that was kind of my philosophy, that I was just going to put myself out there. I was going to make it happen by giving up my life in a way, and then the opportunities would come.
Brilliant. Your approach is certainly very, very different to other photographers. It's quite amazing. This exhibition, I love the book that you've coming out. I love the name of it, and there's a story behind that. And for the people in here who, it's like me, I mean, I have used a camera. I'm not a photographer. I admire people who are photographers and who can really use cameras well to capture stories and so on. Explain the name behind this first of all.
Yeah, the exhibition and the book that's going to accompany it is called 1 Second of Light, and it was because we were talking about getting some photographs together because people wanted to have them themselves and have a book of pictures, and I didn't want to do a retrospective because I don't think I'm quite at the end of my career. Mm-hmm. And I was trying to think of what I wanted to do, and I wanted to put together some of the stories that meant most to me, because as we've been alluding for the last couple of days, it's all about storytelling, and I wanted to share some of the stories that maybe hadn't been published or hadn't been out in other ways. And I was putting all these photographs together, and I guess I had about 130-something images. And I was thinking about shutter speeds, and I don't want to get too technical, but obviously on a camera you've got shutter speeds, and you've got a 60th of a second, 1/2 of a second, 150th of a second. And they're the kind of speeds that I normally shoot at. And then I was looking at all the pictures, and I thought, they're all these fractions of a second. And if I put all the pictures together, they actually only equate to 1 second of light. And so, we kind of, I almost wanted to break down the idea that these pictures are these permanent records. And yes, they are in a sense, but actually they're just fractions of a second in these people's lives. And it gives us a little window into their lives, but we also shouldn't presume that we understand everything about these people's lives. And also for myself, it kind of, rather than thinking pompously I'm putting this book together of all my work, I was just looking at it going, actually this is just 1 second, just 1 second of light that comes together in all these pictures. So that's where the title came from.
And it makes your title all the more appropriate, doesn't it? The Chair of Illumination.
Exactly.
Because it can work on a number of levels. I
Yeah.
mean, you're sort of, you do work with light, and it illuminates the subject and so on, and it does all of these things, so it's particularly appropriate. Can we have a look at some of the images, if you don't mind, and talk us through them, because they've been taken in various places over a number of years, and
so this is
some of them are disturbing as well.
It's one of those things that with photography, if somebody says to me they looked at one of my photographs and they had to turn away, it was too upsetting, then I kind of feel like I failed, because I think the first role of the photographer is to draw people in, because I want people to understand the stories and read the stories. So it's a very delicate balance about trying to create something that's beautiful in a difficult situation, but I try and create something that draws the viewers in. So this is a series in Angola. Some are out there. I had to kind of slightly destroy the illusion of this photograph, because obviously it's a very serene, it's one of my favorite photographs, and to me is a kind of scene that's almost biblical, has a kind of timeless quality.
Actually, you know, there are a lot of these photographs I thought had a biblical resonance to them, and maybe I'll mention that as we go by. But,
But-
why did you particularly enjoy this one?
Well, so this was a story about women in Angola who were wives or widows mainly of former rebel soldiers, and the government had just taken over this area, and they were sheltering in an old school building, and they were terrified that the government soldiers were going to come and attack them, rape them, kill them. And so they found this kind of shelter, and it was an amazing community of let's say, women or mothers. So a lot of them were in the sort of 70s, 80s, and a few children. And when I turned up there, they all kind of ran away. They were a bit scared to see me, and so I would go in every day, and I'd just sit in the corner and just not do anything. I often say one of the sort of key skills as a good photographer is being the most boring person in a room. So you kind of sit there, and people kind of forget you're there after a couple of days. And so people started coming back, and the women would carry on cooking, and so actually by this point they'd got so used to me, it kind of gone beyond that, and so they had a game, and the game was to try and pinch me on the arse when I was taking photographs. So I literally just taken that photograph, and this 80-year-old woman had just come behind and grabbed my arse, and everyone kind of burst into laughter. So yeah, so because they've been living there for a while, the cooking you can see there, they used to just go and literally get anything growing in the area, and then that created this blackened effect on the inside of the buildings. I mean, as a photographer, it was an incredible place to work because the smoke and the light was just incredible. But as I say, there was something about these women there that was incredibly powerful, and incredibly powerful the way they were working together as a community.
There's tremendous dignity in their faces as well, isn't there? Even the poise with which they hold themselves. It's quite amazing, very beautiful.
And this was in the same area. This was an orphanage, and it was the same thing. Most of my work tends to evolve around communities. I'm not really a news photographer, and I'm interested in how communities and families react to bigger crises happening around them. So this was, again, one example of a...
This is Angola again.
Yeah.
So and the same sort of people living of the same danger.
Same sort of area.
Do you know what's amazing about that? I remember seeing a photograph that I worked many years ago in the Derry Journal as a journalist, not a photographer, but they had a book in the office about photography. And there's a photograph on the very back cover. It was a thick, hardback book. The back cover, it was a guy who had just been fished out of the sea at a seaside resort in England. And he'd been with his girlfriend, and there were two guys they had him out of the water on a pier, and two of the guys are working to try and save his life, and the guy's girlfriend was with him at the time, and somebody took a photograph of this. So you have the two guys sort of either side of her, and they're working frantically to save this guy's life, and the girl in between, she's smiling at the camera. She's smiling at the moment when her boyfriend could easily have died. And I'm just looking at this here, in the middle of all this danger, the smiles and the faces of some of the children.
It's funny. It's like I often like doing a sort of set-up picture of a lot of the communities I do.
But you do it deliberately.
But I do it deliberately and kind of
yeah.
create that.
Yeah.
And it was an amazing place because there was a few nuns working there, and as I say, it was a kind of near the front line, and most of these kids had been orphaned in the war. I mean, these two kids, the young girl had actually been found under the bodies of her family and didn't say a word. She didn't speak. And it was kind of surreal because they had all these old-fashioned clothes that they'd found, and people were wearing them. But there was a real, again, we talk about hope in kind of hopeless situations, and you know, the tragedy of this place and the hardships that everybody was going through. This is kind of preparing the food, which was very basic. But there was so much love, and I mean, this picture for me especially represents it. It was just, you know, this young girl who'd been through such horrors, this nun that was holding together a place with constant threats. The priest had just been shot the week before. It was a really dangerous place, and yet you'd see her braiding the hair, and she was being sort of particularly tough and sort of half pulling it and all the rest of it, and the kid was just laughing. But for me, those are the moments I'm always drawn to. Those moments of intimacy in darker situations.
There's a word or a verb that I'll use probably a number of times in the course of this conversation, but that also allows you to do it. It's empathise with it, because that's a scene that many mothers here, or older sisters, things like that could relate to that and empathise with that immediately.
It was funny, I hadn't actually realised it when I was putting together the collection, how many pictures I had people combing people's hair. And there's a certain intimacies that I always get drawn to. And, it was the same in Gaza last week. I again hadn't really realised it until I was just looking through the film of how many pictures I'd done of people's hands holding and things like that. And those are the little moments that I'm drawn to.
Could I ask you one question about these? I mean, there's most of the photographs that we've seen up to now have been black and white
Yeah.
photographs.
I haven't sussed colour out yet.
There's
still working
there are
on that.
colour photos that come. I do know that, but there is a particular kind of drama about black and white photographs. I think personally,
Yeah.
you know, I know obviously colour in certain circumstances lends itself to it, but I think from
There's a certain distilling down of the story when it's in black and white. I think visually it makes your eye work in a different way, and there's also a timeless quality. You know, as I said, my pictures are not really about time and place.
Yeah.
They're not about events. They're about the human condition. One of the things that again is quite a tragedy is in all these stories, all these photographs, the issues that I was covering are still exactly the same. Which is, again, a sort of a tragedy of it. But I want people to think of a bigger picture about the human condition. And this was in Bangladesh in 2009. I did a story that was really hard to do on survivors of acid burns attacks. Because it was very difficult, because I went to acid burn survivors place, and the women there, and men, were trying to kind of regain their dignity, and the idea was that the hospital was run by other survivors of acid burns attacks, so that when the survivors would sort of come to, they would find the nurses had been attacked in the same way, so there was a kind of a safety within that. And so it was very difficult then to go and photograph, because the girls kind of knew you were photographing them because of what had happened, and yet they were trying to feel better about it. And it was interesting. They were sort of doing their makeup still for the photographs, and but it actually
maybe explain for Layla what
Yes.
we're looking at here. Layla, it's a woman, and her face is horribly disfigured. She's had acid thrown on her face, but we can see that her eyebrows have been very carefully. What would you say? Help me out. Sorry. Painted or whatever. Is that what it is? They've done with it, and she's her earrings on and so on. And it's a disturbing photograph, I think. You know?
And again, it was, you know, one of the things I'm always interested in is the things you don't necessarily hear about in the media, and that is the amount of men that get attacked. You hear a lot about women, but the men were attacked often over things like land disputes, and in fact, I saw one of the most upsetting things I think I've ever seen, and I couldn't photograph it, but a young boy was there. He was 4 years old, and his aunt, there had been a dispute between the mother and the aunt over some land, and the aunt had poured acid down her nephew's throat and handed it back to the mother, and the mother only realised, because the baby was screaming but didn't know why, until actually the throat kind of started melting, and the child amazingly survived. But yeah.
Why do you say you couldn't? Because you have taken photographs of horrible things in
It's
this
always,
collection.
Everything is always with the consent of the people I'm photographing. I get to know them, and there are sometimes, you know, I have a lot more photographs that I haven't taken than I have, and sometimes it's just not right or appropriate to do it.
A journalist with a conscience, it's a rare thing. You know? You know?
Again, this was, you know, a lot of these events, it's the families that are impacted around them. So again, this was a man that had been attacked, and what it meant is he couldn't work, and the family was also thrown out of their house. So this was his wife kind of watching.
Do you know, we mentioned earlier on the biblical kind of resonance. I was chatting Emer on earlier on, and she was making a point. That's one of the photographs. There's another one later on which struck me, but Emer was saying that reminds her of, you know, for those who be familiar with sort of Christian imagery or whatever. I mean, it's like that picture of Jesus at the tomb,
Yeah,
something like that. Yeah,
it's funny how
strikes.
you know those sort of things come and you
Yeah.
don't realise. So
Yeah.
this is in. Is my phone going now?
Is it?
No, it's mine in my bag.
Somebody's saying that they can see you online.
Yeah.
Give us
Well,
a
I'm
wave.
hoping actually. I was talking about I put all my stuff in storage,
Yeah.
and for 6 years I've had all my stuff in storage because I just finally found a place to rent when I got injured, and so all my stuff's been in storage. So I finally got a place to live, hopefully. So that should be the
Could be
news
a
on that,
call.
so.
Tell them to get lost. You know, do you know, if the other way around, by the way, if this had been in England and I had a bag sitting there and my bag started to make that noise, I would have emptied the building by now. You know?
This is in Jordan, and this was again about communities. Don't really see when you go to a refugee camp. People are not actually refugees. They are people, like I was saying yesterday, taxi drivers, mechanics, teachers, lawyers, doctors who have become refugees. And the word refugees can become quite dangerous in that it alienates us from those people. And the Syrian crisis is particularly awe-inspiring, I suppose you could say, in its numbers. I mean, there's 4 million refugees outside the country. I think there's 6.5 million displaced within the country. In Jordan alone, there's about 1.5 million. In Zatari camp, there's about 100,000 people living there. And, you know, when you talk about these numbers, it's shocking, but we also don't really relate to it. So I was asked by, say, the children to go and do a story on the camp. And I said, I didn't want to do a story on the camp, I wanted to do a story on a family. Because again, it's those individuals within the crisis that we need to remember and relate to. So
do they allow you, do they give you that latitude, that freedom to approach it and to interpret it as you choose?
Yeah.
They do, yeah.
I mean, I very, very rarely actually do anything if something, most of the stuff I do, 90% of what I do, I go and do it first and then try and work out what to do with it. I would say, yeah, at least 90% is, and if anyone does commission me, then I still go and do what I was going to do anyway. So. But this is Armin and Sawar, Mayim and Salwa, the family. But I'm just looking at my notes because he said a really beautiful thing. I mean, he said, we all have the right to dream and to achieve those dreams. And, you know, in this camp, this family, again, it's all about those little intimacies and relationships.
It's a very tender photograph.
Yeah, and again, you know, there's the media often portray Muslim men from Syria as violent, and we only get to see them on the news when they've got machine guns. And, you know, I just see, as I say, families and people having normal relationships, and those are the kind of things I try and capture.
Giles, I see if you don't mind, sir, if you can back a few photographs to the picture of the father and the child.
Yeah.
Around the, and I'll probably struggle to use the correct language, but there, you've done something around the edges which looks almost earthier than you've done with other photographs.
That was actually, it was pretty much the natural light on that, because
really,
it was inside a sort of half a tent, half a sort of, it's like a sideboard and then tent. So they had these just like bare bulbs that were just coming down that were casting this really. It was actually really hard to work in because there was lots of difficult shadows, but you can see even in that picture the shadow being cast is very
it's dramatic.
It's very dramatic from the light.
Yeah.
It's called Rat Killer. Their cat had come with them. Apparently didn't actually kill any rats whatsoever. But again, you know, children, you know, find ways to play, and I mean, this is a picture that I particularly like from the series because this is the neighbours were just laughing and joking about something, you know. And again, I think people assume that if you go to a refugee camp, everyone's going to be talking about war and everyone's going to be talking. I find, you know, the kids just want to know about football. They want to talk about Barcelona and Real Madrid, or the kids are really upset because they can't watch their favourite soaps anymore. And you know, the parents are sort of there laughing, joking about what you would think as trivial matters. And I think it's important to always remember that because it brings back that humanity that people are no different from us. They're just in very, very different circumstance.
You know, in places that brings its own dangers because even very recently in Gaza, we had that attack of which killed the children playing football on the beach in Gaza. A number of them wiped out just playing football. You know?
So I know a few people have asked about this set of pictures that are out in the corridor. They were taken again in Angola. These were UNITA soldiers who were rebel soldiers in a prisoner of war camp. And, you know, I kind of, it was by accident I found this camp, and I wasn't supposed to be there, but I managed to kind of sneak my way in, weirdly by persuading somebody I was a carpenter. Long story. So I was in there as a carpenter, and I wanted to photograph some of these prisoners, and they just had these incredibly blank expressions, incredibly hollow, and I knew that a lot of these people had done very hideous things. The rebel army was known for the brutality, and I was trying to understand, and as I got talking to them, I realized that these were former child soldiers. These were people that had been taken away from their homes at 12, 13 years old, and had been put in the army and had fought for years and years and years and had grown up. And I was interested in this idea that as a child soldier, when you see a child soldier, people want to reach out, they want to help, they want to look after these kids, they think it's terrible. But what happens if those kids don't get that help? What if those kids aren't saved? Then they grow older and then they become the perpetrators of these crimes. UNITA, the rebel army, had a brutally clever psychological trick. They would go into a village, and the villagers would know that the rebels were there. They were terrified of this idea. The kids especially would be like, you know, he would hear noises in the jungle, is that the rebels? So suddenly when they turn up in the middle of the night, they're terrified, lights shining in their faces. They take all the villagers, put them in the middle, and they choose the kids they're going to take with them, the sort of 12, 13-year-old boys. They grab them, and these boys are terrified. And they say, you have to shoot a member of your family now. They give them a gun, and they make them shoot a family member. And then they take them to the jungle. And then the next day, they say to them, well, you can't go home now. Yeah. You can't go home, because if you go home, they'll kill you for what you've done. We are now your family. Mm. So these kids then accept the rebel army as their only family. They're told, we're the only ones that will love you now. Think what you've done. You've done this terrible thing. Mm-hmm. And so they carry on, and then they grow older, and as they end up like these men, and these men didn't even really know their own names or where they were from. Mm-hmm. They had just spent a lifetime fighting.
So how do you, as a person, an individual, a human being, feel about people like that? In that occasion, when you met those men, and when you think of what, or imagine what they might have been responsible for in the past, horrible atrocities and so on, and then you meet them in this situation.
I mean, you know, the whole thing of responsibility, I guess, is a big question, and I'm sure one that's been faced by people here. The idea of responsibility, the idea of at what point is somebody guilty for their actions, how much of that is forced upon them. Yeah. I mean, as I say, you know, these are adults that were raping, that were attacking villages and killing people in brutal ways. Yeah.
And many people would regard them as monsters because of that.
Yeah, and no doubt they are monsters, but what created that monster? And as I say, at what point, you know, if you've got a 12-year-old kid that's been given a machine gun, you know that's not the kid's fault. Yeah. When he's 14, when he's 16, when he's 18, when he's 20, at what point do you say, oh, now he's an evil person and deserves to be punished? Mm-hmm. And so, you know, it's more of a question. I don't have that answer. But it was the question that was left in my mind when I walked away was you know, yes, these people are responsible, but, you know, at what cost, or what brought them to that point? Yeah. This is a story I did on the Rohingya refugees in Bangladesh. The Rohingya are an ethnic group that are a stateless people. Both Burma and Bangladesh won't accept them as belonging to their country. So they're pushed from the border backwards and forwards, and they have no status there. There are a couple of refugee camps, but they're very limited in number, so there's a lot of unofficial camps. And this is one in a place called Kutupalong, where 25,000 people were living in the unofficial camp. I don't know if you can see it, but up on the top left, you can see sort of slightly more solid buildings, and that's the official camp. And there's a wall around that, and then the sewerage comes from that into this unofficial camp. And the people living in the unofficial camp are not allowed to even visit the camp to get healthcare. They're not allowed to go in to visit doctors. They can't get education. They can't go to any local Bangladeshi doctors. So it was, again, you know, we talk about hopelessness. This was definitely one of the places that had the greatest sense of that. But again, people were, you know, incredibly resilient, and the hardships they've been through, and the sense of hopelessness because they have no state. You know, they have no hope really for what that might be. They still had incredible strength. And again, it was often those little moments that, for me, I was drawn to. Actually, I have to tell you a strange quirk that somebody noticed when I had an exhibition that I hadn't noticed. I'm going to go back. Mm-hmm. And there's a prize for anybody that gets the quirk or the strange connection between that photograph and that photograph, which were taken in completely different places in the camp, in fact, on different days. And it was only later somebody at an exhibition pointed out to me that see the guy at the front, he's got one flip-flop on.
Yeah.
And this guy's got the other one on.
Really?
When you look, they're exactly the same shoes. And yeah, in different points of the camp, they have a shoe each, which I never noticed. MSF was running illegal, actually. They were running a vaccination program that was going on there. I'm just going to carry on kind of moving through these. But this was South Sudan, where I did a story on tribal violence there. This was the Mule tribe. I love this photograph because this camp, this was Le Congle, where there'd been actually quite a bad massacre, an attack. The villagers were kind of rebuilding, and I went there, and I don't think they'd ever seen a white person there, and they're really curious about me. But I always say that this is the fashion photograph that I never took, because to me, this is a photograph of women at their most beautiful and their most natural, and it was, as I say, for me, it was the fashion photograph that I never actually got to take.
I love the way three of the women have their in their hand held their faces and so on.
Yeah.
Good curiosity in their faces and so on.
And it was interesting to see how the tribal violence, this was some of the warriors had just done this sort of dance preparing to go and attack one of the other villages. But the other sort of villages were starting to get heavily armed by outside forces, so you were getting a lot of these child soldiers were getting AK-47s, and this was a group called the White Army that was kind of attacking people that were much more sort of basic in terms of their, they were fighting with spears, and these people were attacking them with AK-47s.
Isn't it kind of amazing though that that in places like that you'd have difficulty finding syringes with which to give out medicine and so on, and yet no difficulty.
No, I mean,
hands
this was in one of the poorest places in the world, and as you can see, these were brand new AK-47s.
Yeah.
I have to say that I almost got shot doing this picture, because not by any bad intent, but just by the clumsiness, because these kids had been given these guns and they had no idea how to use them. And kids being kids, like, you take the photograph and they all wanted to see, so I had a digital camera for this, and I was taking the picture, and they were all running over to try and see themselves, and they were all like posing and then running over and trying to see. Yeah. And they're all kind of leaning over and all the rest of it, and some guy's AK-47 just went firing off because he didn't have a safety on and stuff like that, so I got out of there quite quick.
It's like William Street on a Friday night,
yeah,
as we say around here.
But then the flip side of this story was to say it starts with this is how a lot of people were living, and then outside forces were then arming a lot of the other groups, and then the result was kids like this 12-year-old kid who'd been shot through the liver and was dying, and I kind of would see, like, his face for me was almost identical to this kid's face, and again, who are these people that come and give weapons to these people?
When you took that photograph, I mean, it seems to me that there was a conscious decision on your part what you showed and what you didn't show in that photograph of that young boy.
I actually talked about this picture yesterday. It was a turning point for me. This 12-year-old boy came into a Médecins Sans Frontières hospital, and I say a hospital, it was a selection of mud huts, and there was one doctor, an Australian doctor, who was running it, and there was a lot of casualties coming in because the fighting had sort of gathered pace. So he was kind of going from person to person, working out who he could save, who he could look after, and this boy, he kind of was like, I'll move on. This boy had been shot quite badly in the arm. He didn't moan at all even when he was being checked. And so he moved on thinking this boy, won't make it. So suddenly I was left in the mud hut on my own with this boy, and I had to make the choice as to whether I took a photograph. And I thought, I want to tell the story. It's important to be able to come and say, like I am today, here's a 12-year-old boy who's been shot in this conflict. But as a human, it felt like completely the wrong thing to do. It goes against every human instinct to raise a camera at a dying boy and take his photograph, possibly the last thing he sees. I mean, I think I took about 3 or 4 frames and then sat with him for the rest of the day, but I felt physically sick from having taken that photograph. But I spoke to the doctor that evening, Dr. Murray, and I said to him, I don't think I can do what I'm doing, and it feels wrong to do it. And he went on to explain that as a kid, he was brought up in the Australian outback in a very remote part of Australia, and he was addicted to, like, National Geographic and to Sunday supplements, and seeing pictures like this had inspired him to go and become a doctor and to do the work he does. So again, it didn't make me think, oh, what I'm doing is great, but I do believe this thing of all being cogs in a wheel of change, and we can all have a role to play, and sometimes what we're doing feels completely worthless, and sometimes what we're doing, like, I'm in this place and I'm like, I wish I was a doctor, I wish I could save somebody's life, I wish, I feel stupid sometimes just taking a photograph. But whatever we do, if we do it and do it to the best of our abilities, I think it can make a change, even if that is just influencing somebody else who really can make a change.
Yeah. Were you with this young boy when he died?
Well, actually, miraculously, he was still going the next day. He never moaned, he never complained, and they managed to get him on a there's a very tiny little plane that comes and picks people up. So they put him on a plane and sent him to a slightly bigger town, but I don't know what happened to him after that point. So I got a feeling he survived though. He was.
Which would be fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
These are just some pictures from Afghanistan, which are kind of very different to a lot of the other stuff you've seen.
And these were taken when in Afghanistan?
So this was in 2011.
Which is the year that
Well, this was actually the day before I got blown up.
day before.
So
You see, knowing what happened to you
Yeah.
in Afghanistan meant that when I saw those photos for the first time, I looked at them completely differently. You know?
yeah, and you know, most of my work, or all my work, really is about people affected by conflict. And there was something about these pictures of some Americans attacking something and the absolute power. This is kind of the center of the storm that then affects all this stuff that I get to photograph. And to see the absolute power and devastatingly power of these huge, great bombs being dropped by planes and blowing up a whole hill.
How far away from these explosions were you when this was happening?
Too close.
That looks very close.
Yeah, after that one went on, I got blown off my feet on that one. But you can see the size, because that actually is like a Taliban fort, or it's an old fort that the Taliban had taken. So you get a sense of the scale of that explosion. And then, as I say, that is the same hill being absolutely obliterated.
What's that on the left? You can mix something out there on amidst the smoke.
Yeah.
Don't know what it is.
But as I said, there was something sort of, fascinating about this is what is the centre of
That's what it looks
quite
like.
literally the storm.
Yeah.
And returning to Bangladesh and to the story we were talking about with the Kutupalong camp with the refugees there.
I was going to say, do you mind if we come to Bangladesh in just a moment?
Yeah, no.
Because I want to ask you stuff about.
Yeah, go for it.
Can't let you just gloss over Afghanistan in 2011. I mean, it was the next day then that.
It was a lovely day, yeah, sunny.
And
So the next day we were out on patrol, and we'd been ambushed from a small compound the day before. So the normal tactic is to go back to that compound and check it out. There's very little strategy that really works in Afghanistan. So the American soldiers fighting there kind of feel it themselves that what they do every day is pretty pointless, but they've run out of ideas of how to deal with things. So what would happen is somebody would fire a couple of shots, then the next day they'll go back to where those shots were fired and find there's nothing there, but probably an IED has been planted, because the Taliban know that, and the soldiers are really there to try and provoke the Taliban, because the only way they can find the Taliban to kill the Taliban is if they provoke
pushing
them
on
and they
that
come
kind
out.
of- Yeah.
So it's a very strange game that goes on there, on the actual front. And so we'd been shot at from this particular compound. So the next day we went back to check it out, and there were 6 American soldiers and 6 Afghani soldiers, and they were supposed to be leading the patrol. So we get to the compound, and they're supposed to go over the wall to have a look inside, and they're going, well, we're not going to go in because there's going to be an ID in there. And the Americans say, well, it's your patrol, you go in. So there was a big discussion going on, and while that was going on, I turned to talk to one of the other American soldiers who was laying down a kind of covering fire on the outside. And as I turned around, that's when I triggered the IED.
And where was it in the ground?
So yeah, I
Was it
mean,
in
it's a
the
grand.
wall or-
I don't actually have the photograph, but I've got a photograph that I took, and I remember I kind of forgotten I'd taken it, and it was when I was going through my stuff months after my injury, and I'd taken this photograph just before I stepped forward, and so weirdly as well, there's a kind of strange light coming down,
Yeah.
but in that picture is the IED, and of course I kept searching in this photograph. There's nothing to see. I mean, they are experts in laying these things. You would never notice it if it was there. They don't have metal in them a lot of times, so you can't pick them up with a metal detector. So actually it had been searched with a metal detector. It had been seen as clear, and I stepped on it. And I whether or not it's true, but in my mind I remember kind of a click on my right foot is the foot behind, and the next I knew was a sort of sense of weightlessness, and I was just remember floating in the air, and a bright white heat is how I describe it, just absolutely enveloped me. And then the next I knew, I came down with a thud, landed on my side, and yeah, I could see, say, a bit of my boxer shorts were in the tree. My arm was on fire pretty much, so I knew things weren't great, and I just assumed, I didn't really feel much. I just assumed that was me just gonna drift off at that point.
And did you remain conscious or
Yeah, I never lost consciousness
at any point?
No, I kind of knew. What happened then is basically everyone else on the patrol is head down and looking to see if there's an actual attack coming in, and then everyone shouts their name out, and everyone in the patrol kind of shouts out their name, and it came to me, and I tried to shout, and nothing really came out, and it was very strange. I kind of heard this strange noise. It wasn't my own voice. But they were all shouting, right, we'll come to you. And then they had to clear the area. So it seems like a lifetime while they get to you, because they had to check for secondary IDs. And they got to me, and they put the tourniquets on. And that was the first time I really felt pain. But that was quite good, because I suddenly thought, I'm feeling something. I feel like, alive. And it was strangely lucid. I remember I was talking Chris Metz, who was the sergeant leading the patrol. I had a conversation with him about making sure my laptop got packed up and sent home. He's like, don't worry about that.
Oh, while this was all happening?
Yeah, and I'm lying there, and he's like, he said, do you want a cigarette? And yeah, I don't really smoke, but I thought, what the hell now?
Yeah.
So he had to kind of light the cigarette, and he was doing that, and it was kind of almost like a scene from a film, because then I could see the medevac helicopters coming in over the hill, and they're firing off flares, and they let off smoke, yellow smoke, so that they know where they are, and you're watching this helicopter come in, and I'm having a cigarette. I'm thinking, this is kind of a weird way to die. It was all very like, I'm in a Hollywood movie, I'm dying. So it was my kind of apocalypse now moment. But yeah, it was strangely sort of lucid. And I kept doing this thing, again, as I was talking about yesterday, just thinking, I reckon I can keep going for 2 minutes. I'm probably going to die. I mean, I knew both, my legs were clean off, and my arm, as I say, was pretty bad. This arm was very badly damaged as well. I had bits inside me. And so I kind of was just thinking, amazed I'm still here, but let's keep going for another minute. Don't think much more beyond that. Get through that minute, do the next bit. And then the medevac came, and they pick you up, put you back on the helicopter. It was about a 20-minute journey back to Kandahar, and getting conscious through that whole journey. It was tricky. I found out later they didn't give me any morphine, which
Didn't help?
No, they decided not to give me morphine because all my spines were really stable. So they have a sort of rule that they don't add anything. If you're staying stable, don't add morphine. Don't do anything.
Which is kind of remarkable to hear that about that stability, because you did come perilously close to death on a number of occasions.
Yeah, I mean, very few triple amputees survive, and yeah, in that situation, I think in 20 up to that point had survived in that theatre of war. So it was a miraculous thing, and yeah, I was still fully conscious when we got to the hospital and chatting away. I actually, I was showing a clip of the film because it was filmed. They had helmet cameras, but when we landed in Kandahar, I actually thanked the medevac crew, and these American guys months later managed to sort of track me down and got in contact, and they didn't know who the hell I was. They were like, "Is this guy a special forces guy? Is he whatever?" And then they're like, "Who the hell thanks us?" It's just, his legs blown off, and
I am British,
Yeah, no, exactly. That's what I said to them. I said, "Well, yeah, this is how the British do things." But yeah, it was very touch and go.
How long was it then until you resumed your career as a photographer? Well,
Yeah.
I mean, there must have been some point where you thought, well, I mean, not alone, you thought you were going to die at one point, and there must have been some point you thought,
There was.
I'll never be a photographer again.
Well, I came back to the UK and I spent 46 days in intensive care. My lungs stopped working, my kidneys stopped working. I was on dialysis. My temperature went up to 150 something. They were actually taking packs of ice and sticking it around me. And they tried experimenting things. They took out my blood and stuck it into a freezer element and then back into me. They were trying all different things to keep me going. Twice my family was kind of called in saying he's not going to make it through the night, come say your goodbyes. And I couldn't talk to them. I was conscious, but I had a tracheotomy, and so I could only communicate when my hand was in a cast, so I could only communicate by blinking. So I try and, but it's quite
And
difficult.
were you always aware through it?
Yes,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
remember like my
Totally,
sister
yeah.
saying, pretty much saying goodbye, and I was just blinking, going, I'm not going anywhere. What do you mean? But yeah, it was very touch and go for 46 days. But in terms of what you were saying about, when I thought I would be able to return to work, 3 days after I was injured, so literally the day I arrived back in the UK, I was wheeled past my sister, and my family had been said, don't expect, because there was a lot of lung damage. And they could see I was trying to say something, so I took the mask off, and all I said to my sister was, I'm still a photographer. I think she wanted to say, I love you, or whatever, but the only words, I said, I don't remember saying it. But in my head, I was always going to return. And, it was a long, dark period of after intensive care. In some ways, it's harder for me, because that's when I had to come to terms with being a triple amputee. I couldn't even sit up in bed on my own. I was told I wouldn't walk again. I wouldn't, be able to live independently. They told me this hand would never work properly. So that was the tough time, kind of coming to terms with that, coming to terms with how I looked. 3 months after I was injured, I was wheeled to the shower for the first time, and I saw myself in a mirror, and I just burst into tears and was repulsed by what I saw, and at that point wanted to die, wish I'd never made it. But there was still that sense, and the next day I kind of woke up saying, no, I'm going to turn this around somehow. So.
You're a handsome devil, I'll say. I'm a heterosexual man, by the way, just any of the ladies out there, but you are a very handsome guy, And many of the women here have said that to me. No, it's true, Thank you. Is this him or me? I mean, it invites a few questions, and I just thinking back to what Phil was talking about just yesterday. I mean, maybe this will sound gauche and so on, and I apologise if it does, but practical things. You decided to go back to photography. How long was it, by the way, before you were up and?
I was back in Afghanistan.
I was almost about to say up and running, and I was thinking earlier on back in your feet. Terminology.
I was back in Afghanistan 18 months later.
18 months later, which is remarkable. Gauche question number one. How do you use a camera when you have one arm functioning left?
It's amazing how the body adapts. I remember like the first time, trying to do something like plug an iPhone in and just going fucking crazy and just trying to plug it in and it was coming on the floor and the nurses would come and say, I'll do that for you. I'd be like, nope. And Edson will tell you how stubborn I am. I don't like anybody to do anything for me because I always knew right from the beginning this was going to be tough. And I knew it wasn't going to be easy, especially if I wanted to go back to work and go to places like Gaza and stuff. So I made a choice right at the beginning that I would have nothing adapted to me. I would adapt to things. I would find ways to do things, but I would try and do everything myself. But yeah, I mean, all of that was hard. And in terms of holding a camera, it's funny because people will say to me, oh, you're so lucky because, these days, small cameras and all the rest of it. I've actually gone back to shooting on an old film camera, and I've got a big medium format camera. So trying to load medium format one-handed and stuff is yeah.
Are you still using film in it?
Yeah,
film
yeah. So, and it's,
yeah.
Well, you just, yeah.
You just learned.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Because I've done that, and it's fiddly when you have two functioning hands.
Yeah.
I can't do it with two arms.
Bigger format's a little bit easier, but when you're trying to get a 30mm, I love digital photography.
You have to be. I think the thing I realised quite early on was I was just going to be really patient, and I just I accept that things take me twice as long, 3 times as long as anybody else, but I can still do everything. There's nothing I don't really do. I love cooking, and I cook everything exactly the same, and I spend time doing it, and you just have to just chill out a bit and just say, don't get frustrated.
Taking twice or 3 times as long isn't necessarily a bad thing. Have you any idea who asked that question, by the way? That wasn't my question. Somebody else wanted to know that question. That was one of the...
Right, one of the...
Can you guess?
No, I'll figure it out.
I'll leave it. The other question, are there ever moments, you mentioned at one point breaking down 3 months later, whatever, but are there times now, because yesterday when you talked, you sounded so together and so forgiving about the people who left the device, which caused these horrific injuries and so on, but are there times when you feel utter despair, when you break down, lose control, become extremely emotional?
I mean, genuinely, these days, there isn't at all. I feel, grateful. Sometimes I get, a bit frustrated. I'll wake up and I think, oh, fuck, I've got no legs. I almost forget, and you're sometimes, and sometimes I'm really just a day off would be really nice. Just have some legs for a day. Because everything is a pain in the ass. It's really small things, like try putting a woolly hat on one-handed. Just think about it. It's not easy, And so it's silly little things like that. It's of course as a photographer, if you watch a photographer at work, they'll be crouching down, they'll be reaching up, they'll be doing that, they'll be running around to that corner. I can't do any of that, and so sometimes when I'm taking a photograph, I'm like, I wish I had more freedom to express the way I work. But I also believe a lot of creativity comes from restrictions. And so I've kind of used that again to my advantage. I thought, you know what, I'm just going to stay. So I tend to use just one fixed lens and keep everything really simple and find ways around it and concentrate on what I can do, which is empathy with people, connection with people, try to tell their stories and focus more on that. So yeah, I mean, there are days, of course, you know, somebody said to me recently, they said, you know, I guess in some ways you must be glad of what happened because it's opened up all these other opportunities. And I'm like, you know, I would never be glad about losing my legs, my arm. I would give anything to have it back.
Yeah.
But it is what it is, you know. And
the other bone that you're saying.
yeah, they don't really work for me because I don't have an elbow, so they become very like. I did have one, but they're a real pain in the ass. You have to unlock it, and move it around, and so I found it's easier without it actually. So.
Go back to photography
Mhm.
now, if that's okay,
Yeah.
because we're here to talk about your work, and I'm just wondering, after that experience, I'm assuming that it changed you hugely as a photographer. I mean, when you mentioned, and I know the next
Well-
set of photos is come back to Bangladesh,
Well-
but when you went back to Afghanistan, for example,
Yeah, but you see, what's
Is that a
interesting is, again, with this book, is some of the pictures are taken before and
Yeah,
some are after.
yeah.
So already we've seen some photographs taken before and some after I was injured,
yeah,
and I don't think you can tell the difference.
yeah, I
And,
couldn't.
and that was for me was the, you know, some people have said, oh, you know, you have, you know, maybe a better empathy. And, you know, I think I had a pretty good empathy with people before, and yeah, my technique, I can't move around so much. But actually, I was quite a lazy photographer. I tended to stay in one place anyway. So things have kind of balanced out, and I can see differences.
Yeah.
But for me, that was really, you know, my work is everything, and I kept thinking if I can just take a photograph in the way that I used to, it looks the same, and that picture just is published without my story, then I've defeated this. You know, it's like I have no disability when I have a camera in my hand. You know, people see me, people always perceive me as disabled, and you know, you're always pigeonholed, and people want to come and help you and do those things. But I'm like, you know what? I travel to places like Gaza, I travel with my camera, and when I take that photograph, I have absolutely no disability.
Do you know what I mean? You're right. When I've been through all the photographs, and I couldn't tell the difference other than looking at the date when they were taken. So I can't tell the difference.
There's a few more out of focus these days.
Yeah. But do you know who can tell the difference? The people whose photographs you're taking.
Mm.
And,
No, and
how do they react to you?
I mean,
now?
it's I don't like, you know, I feel uncomfortable sometimes in this kind of role as being inspiring to people, but I guess it's unavoidable that a lot of the places I go to, people with disabilities are often seen as being incapable. They're seen as being weak. They're seen as being useless to communities. They're often ostracized. They're stigmatized. And so, you know, what I often notice is people who have missing limbs, and they see me walking in, and they see me working, and you can see their chest just comes out a little bit, because they're saying, look at this guy, you know, and they can see the impact I'm having maybe on other people in that community. And so it's a small thing, but it's a sense of unity among people that have that disability. And I say I'm lucky, you know, I've had the best treatment, I've got the prosthetic legs I need, and all the rest of it. But and I'm lucky I'm in a society that enabled me to carry on doing my work and didn't judge me for that. But anybody with a disability gets judged every single day of their life. Every single day of my life, I have to prove to people. I have to work twice as hard as everybody else. It took me 2 years of taking photographs again before somebody would publish my work without saying the work by the disabled photographer. You know, you have to fight every single day. And when I go to Gaza, when I go to Afghanistan, you know, I feel honored to be, you know, walking alongside those people who have been injured in similar ways.
Yeah. Do you know what's amazing? I mean, this can sound like the cheesiest line I've ever uttered in a conversation with anybody in my life, but it's absolutely true. I mean, they took away your legs, they took away one of your arms, but they didn't take away your spirit. It's amazing, you know, and it's totally true, you know. I can see why you'd be an inspiration to people. So I'm certainly well up, so we'll go on to photographs here, if that's okay.
So briefly, I was just going to return to, we were talking about Kutupalong camp and the refugees.
Can I interject here?
Yeah.
Yeah, you just have?
A question that's bursting to get out, and that is, you go back as evidence and as a healer into the country in which damage was done to you.
Mm.
In order to prevent people now moving from England to ISIS, and in order to prevent the work that's going on now in other countries of the world by despots and their followers and by terrorists, do you go into schools in England, into Muslim schools? Do you go into schools in but predominantly in England because of the issues that are now arising with lots of young people emigrating to Turkey to get through to
To Syria.
Syria.
Um,
And in order, if we're talking about prevention
mhm.
in terms of community development, preventing issues, and early intervention and all of that, are you and your colleagues that have other injuries? Because lots of people have been injured all over the world in different wars, as in Ireland and in Northern Ireland and in everywhere in the world. You know, is there a collegiate, is there a group that you belong to that runs these storytelling and self acknowledgement stories to schools and youth groups that are not of that are minority ethnic, that feel marginalised?
Simple answer is no. I mean, I don't know of any group like that. I don't do. I go to schools when I can, but unfortunately, I'm away. You know, most of the year. I do talks in schools, but not particularly choosing some that maybe have more Muslims or not. I mean, I talk a lot of schools in London that are, you know, mixed and have those issues. I think it would be a very valuable thing to do. As I say, for me, unfortunately, I'm away. You know, I was in 15 countries last year working. You know, for me, what I think is important as well is on another level is, for example, in Afghanistan, I don't think there's ever been anybody injured in Afghanistan that's returned, because the soldiers obviously don't return, and I was in a unique position to return. And I was getting people, you know, stopping me in the street, hugging me, because it meant so much to them. People literally crying that I had come back. And I kept saying, you know, I never blame the Afghan people. I have nothing but love for the Afghan people. And it meant a lot for people to have that interaction and for me to return. And, you know, even in Gaza or wherever, people, it's symbolic, I think, to go back or to go to these places even after what's happened. So maybe that's my role. But I think what you're saying would be important.
And also, the evidence that you have now of poverty and the injuries that have been put on people through the lack of, or through the distraction of funding going to the despots and the leaders within those countries that then administer the funding, rather than going in underground into the communities where they're needed. That's what happened in Gaza in a way years and years and years ago, where in some respects there was a marginalisation and there was a hurt done, and then in some respects the rebels took advantage and started to feed the people who were in poverty and who were uneducated and who didn't have any jobs and couldn't fend for themselves. So it was actually the rebels that actually...
No, I mean, it's an incredibly complex issue, and I've seen those kind of things going on.
How do you get the money into Gaza?
You know, like I said earlier, I think we all have these different cogs to play and roles to play. Mine as the storyteller is hopefully that other people, such as politicians, can work on that side of things. At the moment, with just one hand, I'm keeping myself busy enough taking photographs. So I will leave that to somebody else to find the answers.
Yeah. At the end of the day, you're a photographer. That's what you are.
Yeah.
That's what you do. And as I say, as you've explained, you see it as part of that storytelling tradition. And that's your trade.
Yeah.
We're in Bangladesh.
So very briefly, we'll just go through a few more of these pictures. So we were talking about Kutupalong and the refugee camp. And as I say, one of the tragedies there is that the people can't go to see doctors. So people even with very basic medical conditions get no treatment. So I spoke to the village elder and I said I'd like to come back and do some portraits of some of the people living there and to take again these sort of simple portraits of these people. It's one of the things I do a lot of is using a white background.
Yeah.
Because I think sometimes taking people out of their environment as well makes us see them in different people, and again makes us just focus on on
So
the individuals.
do you bring something with you, or what? Or
I've
do
got
you
the
use
most,
something
I
there?
have the most well-travelled white sheet in the world.
Yeah,
It's funny because sometimes people go, you know,
Yeah.
people into photography ask me, you know, what technique do you use and how do you
Yeah,
achieve that and the
yeah.
rest of it. I literally have a white bed sheet that's
Yeah.
travelled
That's
like,
amazing, isn't it? So even though that was the same background then for the former child soldiers in Angola,
yeah,
we saw
yeah,
the same.
yeah,
right?
it's been all around the world. It's pretty mouldy actually and dirty, but hey.
That photograph actually just a moment ago was one that I found. Yeah, right there.
This was what was shocking is I asked the village elder if I could come back and do these portraits, and I'd set up a little makeshift studio with my sheet, and I came back at 6 o'clock in the morning, and when I got there were literally hundreds of sick and dying people, and they were bringing all these incredibly ill people to me, and again I said to them, look, you know, they have to understand I'm not a doctor, I can't help them. And the village elder said, no, it's all right, they know you're just a photographer, but at least you can tell their story.
Yeah.
But this was two brothers, and one was in such pain. But the brother that's standing, holding the ill brother, was one of the most stoic people I've ever met. He just, you know, had
That
the
just
strength.
brings, you know the words of that song, "You ain't heavy, he's my brother." Just
Yeah, absolutely.
Incredible stuff. You've this approach to photography, and it's amazing, you know, the sort of the thought that goes into it. You know, I mean, a lot of people, I mean, as a kind of a breed, photographers are often kind of swashbuckling. They go to the places where journalists don't have to go. They put themselves in the line of danger, and you know, I don't know. Sometimes they're these kinds of buccaneering spirits, but you have a depth to you, and you bring an approach to the job which I find amazing. For example, your philosophy, this idea of taking photos. You do not subscribe to the notion of taking photos. Explain that for.
Yeah, I mean, I always believe the best photographs are not taken; they're always given. And you know, I see a lot of photographers working, and they'll go to a place, and they'll see people. You know, they'll see kids, and I'm just trying to flick through to some pictures, but they'll kind of just rush in and take a photograph, and it is taking it. And for me, I always spend time with people. I always get to know them, build up some kind of trust and relationship. And sometimes I don't take photographs. But if you give me an hour with somebody, I will spend 50 minutes talking to them and 10 minutes taking a picture. If you give me a day, you know, I'll spend most of the day talking. But at the very least, I like to try and spend a week in a place before I take any photographs. And we're just going back these pictures from Afghanistan when I returned. You know, again was difficult because a lot of people were coming in kind of more emergency situations. But actually, you know, all these photographs were done by spending time with people and getting to know them. Like this is Sedakola. You know, and Sedakola actually asked me to come in and take these photographs when he was in surgery because I got to know him over time. And a funny story
that's the one that makes like a crucifixion.
Yeah, yeah. Again, it's funny how sometimes these pictures. I always think this one has a kind of strange sort of religious. But Sedakola, he poor kid had been playing in the garden and detonated a explosive device and lost a lot of his fingers, and so he was having surgery done. He was comes from a place called the Panjshir Valley in Afghanistan, where the toughest people you'll ever meet. You know, they're very proud of the fact that the British, the Russians, the Taliban have never taken this valley. And as I say, anywhere I've been in the world, they are the toughest people. And so this kid was lying there, and you know, wasn't moaning at all, and getting his hands fixed. And I took some photographs, and then the next day I did some portraits of him as well. And when he was discharged from hospital, maybe a week or so later, it was quite hard to find, but I found somewhere to print one of these portraits, nice portraits of him, to give him. And so I went and found him and said, "Oh, Freddie, you know, here's this portrait." And I handed it over, and the absolute look of disappointment on his face. And I was like, "Well, don't you like the picture?" And he's like, "I want the pictures of my hands being all operated on." Because I've been trying to thinking, like, oh, he'd be traumatized if he saw these horrible pictures. But of course, like a kid being a kid, he's like, "I want the really gruesome pictures of my hands all bloody to go and show his mates when he got home." So we had to get them reprinted. But maybe one thing that has slightly changed with the way I work, I mean, you know, this would be a good example of Saeed, who was a stonemason, and on his way to work, his vehicle went over an IED, and he lost both his legs. And as a photographer, certainly when you're commissioned, you know, if somebody's lost their legs and they're in a wheelchair, the editor would expect you to show that in the picture. They'd say, you need to see his injuries, you need to know his story. And actually, the story I found with him was that he had a extended family of about 8 people that he had to support. And his great concern was not about his own pain, not about his injuries, but who was going to support his family now. And it was like he had the weight of the world on his shoulders. And for me, that was the story. And maybe that's something as well that I've learned through my own experience is, again, sometimes people will be photographing me and sometimes I think they must think I'm stupid because it'd be like somebody doing it for a magazine. And I can tell from the way that they're doing that the main thing they're trying to get in is my legs. Or they'll ask me, can you come in shorts for the photo shoot? And I'll be like, well, no, and I see, but I understand it because the editor will be like, oh, it's Giles, you have to make sure we can see he's got no legs and the rest of it. And for me, I think I was a little bit like it before, but I'm definitely a lot more like it now, that it's always about that person and their story, and you don't always need to show the injuries to show their suffering.
Giles, when's the book going to be out?
So it's going to be out in about a month and a half's time. So I was hoping to have it here today, but I'm really anal, and I saw a couple of things in it I didn't like, so I didn't want to get it finished. And then I got sidetracked in Gaza and various other things. As you do. But it'll be out in a month and a half. And if anybody wants to give an email, we've got a list out there, and then I can let them know when it's out. And anybody that's here today, I'll sign it and everything as when I send it out. So.
Look, ladies and gentlemen, I mean an absolute living embodiment of the name of this conference, Hope Beyond Hurt, and it's amazing the work that you're doing. I just absolutely admire you as a photographer and as a person, and Giles, it's been a privilege to meet you and talk to you, so thank you.
Thank you.
And thanks to Big Taker. I think that's it from Until Beyond Hope, which the next one may or may not be called, probably won't, but it brings the curtain down on Hope Beyond Hurt, and an amazing way to finish it. And it should, in one sense, be an utterly tragic story, but you're such an uplifting person. And it's back to what I talked about yesterday, you give people hope and inspiration and so on, and it's been fantastic talking to you, so thanks a million.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It's very easy to come in.
Yeah.
People are here quite regularly. We have our weekly lunch. Next one's just going to be here till the end of the month. And, just come in and spend a bit of time looking at the photographs, come back.
Yeah.
It's important just to spend that time with them. And it's always a privilege when we get exhibitions in here. I know what I speak for myself and all my colleagues. We've been spending time with these photographs, and, every day you see something different.
I was going to say as well, I was talking earlier about the garden in Kabul.
Yeah.
And that's actually that photograph, which is in the exhibition. But I'm going to leave that picture here. So I'm going to leave that one
Thank you.
as a memory here.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I'll leave it here as a memory of that.
That's Eamon Dean walking in that garden thinking, what are we going to do next? That kind of image. Giles, thanks very much. Thanks for being here, Giles. Thanks for sharing with us. Thanks to Edson too, Giles' photographic agent. It's great to meet you, and I hope you've learned a wee bit of Derry and that you'll use it when you go back to Holland or London or wherever. It's been great to meet you, and thanks a million. And that's it from the Hope Beyond Hurt conference. Okay, Susan, thank you very much. And thanks everybody for attending. I hope you get something out of it, and hope you stay committed and continue on the journey. It's very important, and to get to a better place. Thank you very much. Thank you.